Hey guys, welcome back. Today, I thought I'd do something a little different. I want to bring you behind the scenes of how I created this mischievous little demon girl illustration. Not just the drawing process itself, but also some of the thoughts, decisions, and tiny stories that happened along the way. So, this piece actually started out really simple. I just wanted to make a portrait. Nothing too complicated at first. I opened up Procreate on my iPad and began with a basic sketch. But as I was sketching, the idea started to evolve. I thought, what if this isn't just any character? What if she has this devilish, playful vibe? That's where the horns and ears came in. I gave her goat horns because goat horns just have that perfect mix of strength and a little bit of creepiness. They instantly say demon without being too obvious. To balance it, I added goat-like ears, which also gave her this slightly animalistic, fantasy look. And overall, I wanted her face to feel a little androgynous, not super feminine, not overly masculine. Just something in between that makes you stop and wonder. Then came her outfit. I imagined her in a strapless dress, because a strapless look gives off this kind of bold, confident energy. Around her neck, I added a chunky metal chain choker. I liked the idea of mixing beauty with something a little intimidating, almost like armor. Now, let's talk about the eyes. I deliberately spaced them a bit wider apart, just to create that otherworldly feeling. And I added small symbolic markings on her face, almost like tattoos or runes, to make her feel like she belongs in her own little mythology. One unusual choice I made was to skip the highlights in her eyes. Normally, when we draw characters, adding that bright little sparkle makes them look alive. But here, I wanted her to look slightly unsettling, so I left the eyes flat and deep. Later, when I switched over to markers, that choice really stood out. Her hair was something I thought about from the very beginning. I pictured it wavy with these soft curls, not too dramatic but enough to frame her face. The color I imagined was a very pale yellow, almost like light passing through wheat. And for her skin tone, I didn't want the usual warm, healthy blush. I actually wanted her to look drained of color, a little pale, like someone who lives in the shadows. So, I reached for my warm gray markers as the base. Then I layered a touch of yellow to suggest skin, but still keep that washed-out, bloodless feeling. That's why you won't see heavy blush or rosy tones on her cheeks. It just didn't fit the mood. Now, the horns, this was fun. I colored them black as the main tone, but black alone can look flat. So I blended in just a bit of light blue to give them depth and life. It's a small detail, but it makes a big difference. For inspiration, I actually studied goat horns and ears, so if you look closely, the anatomy is pretty close to real life. I also added hints of warm yellow into the horns, which gave them layers, almost like they've been catching sunlight for years. One of the biggest challenges in this piece was actually working with the markers, especially the darker tones. If you've ever used alcohol markers, you know light colors are forgiving. You can layer them slowly and build up. But dark colors? Once you commit, there's no going back. If you go too dark, it's almost impossible to lighten it again. So the horns and darker shadows were definitely the most nerve-wracking part of the process. On her face, I decided to add a few small decorative patterns. I used green and a light red, two colors that contrast nicely. Without those accents, the whole portrait might have felt too monotone since so many of the other shades are neutral. It was a subtle way of balancing the palette. Then there's the metallic detail, the chain choker around her neck. I chose silver instead of gold. Gold felt too elegant, almost too divine. But silver has this colder, sharper vibe. It immediately felt more in line with a little demon character, so that's why I went with it. Throughout this process, I kept comparing my digital sketch to what I was doing traditionally with markers. Digital gives you that freedom to undo, to experiment without risk. But with markers, every stroke is permanent, and that tension is part of what makes it exciting. Honestly, I think that's why I love doing both. Digital helps me plan, but traditional forces me to commit. As I was working, I also started imagining her as a character. Like, what kind of personality would she have? To me, she feels like the kind of demon that isn't purely evil, but mischievous, playful, maybe even lonely in her own way. The wide eyes without highlights make her a little haunting, but the soft curls in her hair balance that with a touch of charm. And that's how she came together, from the first lines in Procreate, to the layers of marker, to all the little decisions along the way. Every choice, the horns, the pale skin, the lack of highlights, the silver accessories, they all added up to create this one mischievous little demon girl who feels like she could step out of the page and into her own story. So, that's the behind the scenes of this drawing. I hope you enjoyed hearing the thought process, and maybe it inspires you to play around with your own characters. Sometimes the best ideas come when you just start with something simple, like a portrait, and then let your imagination twist it into something completely different. And that's it. Our little mischievous demon girl is complete. I had so much fun experimenting with her horns, her pale skin, and all those tiny details that really brought her to life. Every time I work with markers, I learn something new, especially when it comes to layering colors and handling those tricky dark tones. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me during this process. Maybe it gave you a little inspiration for your own characters, or maybe it just reminded you that even a simple sketch can grow into something magical when you let your imagination play. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.